Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Peak Human Podcast. I'm Brian Sanders. I'm the creator of the Food Lies documentary series, founder of nosetotale.org, where you get regenerative meat and body care products made from beef tallow. And I talked to Dave Feldman today in person. I swung through Vegas, caught him for a live interview, and we got to discuss his great new scientific trial he's been working on for years. Amazing results. You're going to want to hear this one, especially if your LDL has gone up due to eating meat and fat and animal products like it has for me and so many others. But I'm not worried because now we have some good science to show why this may not be what the mainstream thinks it is. So, huge episode with Dave. Gets a little nerdy. It's really cool, though. You can watch his presentations online as well. We'll link to that in the show notes. Quick update on Food Lies. We are trying to finish episode 1 soon so we can pitch to this amazing studio in LA that has 3 documentaries currently on Netflix. Big time people doing great documentaries, and they're very interested in Food Lies. So this is great news. Also, I'm getting back into some health coaching. I'm looking for 3 people to work with over 3 months. Serious people who need to lose a significant amount of weight and change their life. This is a paid program with me and my team, nutritionist. We have a biochem engineer. We're going to help you change your life, and then we're going to do a podcast about it 3 months from now. So big one-on-one program, not cheap, but you can change your life. We'll help you get there. Email me, hi@sapien.org. DM me at foodlies on Instagram. That's food.lies on Instagram. And we can take your application for that. A little bit more about Dave Feldman. He's a senior software engineer. He's been doing this stuff for 8 years now. He runs cholesterolcode.com. He's been doing studies. He's been doing experiments on himself, on others. He's amazing. He goes around the world speaking at conferences about cholesterol. There's so much that we don't know about cholesterol, and he's one of the main people out there trying to figure it all out. So support his study. Listen to this episode, and we'll see you next week. All right. We're live with Dave Feldman here in Las Vegas. How's it going?
It's good. It's good. Thanks for having me back, Brian.
Cool. Yeah, we're here in Vegas. I'll set the scene a little. We're on a little couch together in my hotel room. I was just on Adam Carolla yesterday, which was really cool. So check that out. Go to his YouTube channel. It was fun. Came through Vegas, called up Dave, and we set up an episode. So this is great. I just watched your Low Carb Denver presentation, which was awesome. We'll get into all that. I was there, but I was filming for Food Lies. I was stuck in an Airbnb, and I didn't get to see your presentation. But it just came out on their YouTube channel 11 days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can check it out on the YouTube channel, Low Carb Conferences.
I think so.
Something like that. We'll link to it.
Just Google Dave Feldman cholesterol, Low Carb Denver.
Low
You'll probably
Carb
get it.
2023. Super exciting stuff. Actually, just completed a lot of research. You've been on an 8-year journey yourself, probably even longer when you start to wake up to the health stuff. But 8 years been really investigating cholesterol. You were on Peak Human years ago. Go back and find that one. It was great. We covered all the high-level stuff and a lot of details. Hopefully we don't get too nerdy today. We'll start with the high-level stuff for the people before we lose them. What is going on with cholesterol? A lot of people, it's the first thing that their doctor tells them. They're like, hey, we got to stop. Or what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, basically a lot of people like me, when going lower carb, sometimes see their cholesterol rise. And I naturally got concerned. And so I became obsessed, trying to learn everything I could about how that happens. And so here we are years later, and yes, we have a model. It's now published called the Lipid energy model that I think helps explain why you see cholesterol going higher for some people who decide, like me, to not only reduce carbs, but be powered more by fat. If you're powered more by fat, you have to ship it inside your bloodstream, and the shipping process involves cholesterol.
Yeah, and so cholesterol is not a bad thing. It's a necessary thing of your body.
Well, so I'll give the political answer, I guess you could say, which is that if it is true that the containers that have that cholesterol in our bloodstream, lipoproteins, lipid-carrying proteins, if they are inherently atherogenic, then it would be bad. Then it would be a bad thing if you're powered by fat, if they just happen to do, they happen to create plaque in the arteries.
They just harm you for no reason.
Yeah, I mean, that's, to be fair, obviously, as you know, I'm optimistic we're ultimately not going to find out the case, but that's what also led to Beyond the Model, this study that we're doing. We're looking at people like myself, like yourself, who are a little bit more on the metabolically healthy end of the spectrum, but who are on a low-carb diet and their cholesterol went sky high. And I said, here's a thought, let's just study them. If they're already non-adherent to medication, they're not taking steps to lower it, why not go ahead and scan their coronary arteries twice, once at day 0 and then again a year later. And then if we get a bunch of them to do it, we can see a comparison. How much plaque do they have at baseline in their arteries, especially if they've been on the diet for a while, and then how much will they have a year later? And that's the gist of the study.
We need this study done. I know you funded it with the crowd. A lot of great people in the community put in their own money because who else is going to do the study? I actually just had Dr. Joel Kahn on the podcast, the vegan doctor.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. We had a nice talk. It wasn't a fiery debate or anything. Maybe I could have made it more of that. I don't know if he wanted to do that. But he was just talking about these studies. He's like, get your coronary artery score, He's just, I follow the science. I'm like, well, you follow the vegan science. But I get that you follow the science, and I get that there's not a lot of these studies out there, right? He was saying, well, the vegan diet is the only one we know of so far that can reduce your heart disease risk. It's like, yes, it's the only one studied. And yes, all these other studies, it's like, yeah, people who, about this one, it's something where they, a bunch of people did a whole bunch of lifestyle interventions and dietary interventions, and, it's a major dietary intervention to cut out all meat, and they ended up losing weight. And so, yes, they had some good results.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not good to chat about these things when it comes to food sciences because, frankly, the longest term studies we have, like Esselstyn, for example, they don't have one intervention, they have multiple interventions. Mm-hmm. If you've watched me, like my earliest genesis into this was my own self-experimentation. And I get more and more obsessed with controlling all variables except for the one of interest. Mm-hmm. Because to me, that's just the best experimentation, is if you can, it's the reason you do randomized placebo-controlled trials, is you're trying to have something that even the participants and the trialists themselves don't know has been the thing that changed. And then only at the end of the trial, reveal that change and then what the outcome was with the people involved.
All right, got to jump in here for a quick second to talk about nosetotale.org. We got our meat back in stock. We're shipping. We got a better system. Help support our local ranchers here in Texas with the best regenerative meat. They've been doing it for 30 years. They figured out regenerative 30 years ago. Really great stuff. Primal ground beef as well. Get the organs mixed in. And of course, the body care products made from beef tallow. Deodorant, hair food, skin food, soap, lip balm. Man, this stuff is so good. It's what I use. Check it out, nosetotale.org. Thanks, everyone.
Well, so in the case of where I introduce an intervention, and I can't be fully blinded, but I can control all the other variables, I'll do that. Unfortunately, with a lot of these studies, and this is just kind of one of the problems with epidemiology, you may already have an opinion of the food that you're consuming. Mm-hmm. That's problem number one, as far as what you think is going on. This is why placebo effect itself is a thing. But on top of that, a lot of times the intervention isn't just a change in diet, or just a change in one thing, such as the addition or subtraction of meat. And it could be meat is inherently pathogenic, right? But what I want to see is a study that can somehow placebo control that. Like, that would be an interesting study to me. If there was,
you could, actually just get that one variable.
Yeah, like let's say that they really got to a point where fake meat was indistinguishable to us, mm-hmm. such that you really could do a placebo-controlled trial. I think that would be magnificent. I wish that study existed today.
Yeah, if everyone was doing the same thing, eating the same amount of calories, because you'd have to get that analog, right? That exact meat analog, because with this vegan study, I looked into it a little bit. I mean, these people were just cleaning up their diet and eating completely differently and eating far less and losing weight. So it's just, there's a lot of benefits that come from losing weight. And even Joel Kahn admitted himself, they did yoga, they were doing mindfulness exercises, they're doing all these things. And I was like, yeah, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, again, this isn't me rejecting that what's being proposed is possible, that it really was the meat. Just that this is why I don't find these studies as interesting. And in fact, this is part of why I was interested in this group that we're studying. As you know, I refer to them as lean mass hyperresponders, which is now in the literature. We've actually published, with the help of great people like Nick Norwitz and Adrian Sotomoda, my co-authors, we've codified this. When I was first doing this, when I was lowering my carbs, I'd already heard the term hyper responder, and it actually came from Peter Attia and Thomas Dayspring. And so lean mass was just something I observationally saw with folks like myself, like you, where if we're leaner, the leaner we are, the more likely there's this, not just the higher LDL, but higher HDL and triglycerides. Well, so bringing it back to what you were just describing with these dietary interventions, there kind of was almost a shotgun of different variables all at the same time, in that many folks who had the highest LDL would be the ones who actually had the least amount of plants in their diet, and often would have the highest amount, many of them just straight up carnivore. Really lean, really athletic, carnivore is almost, it's a high likelihood that you're going to have this phenotype, lean mass hyperresponders. So in a roundabout way, that's also something interesting about our studies, because there'll be so many people who are on a very, high red meat, high animal protein, high in saturated fat, low in fiber. They're checking all the boxes, right?
They're doing the opposite of what we're told, and they may be doing great. We'll have to ask you about the results so far, and you don't know the full results yet, but it would be pretty interesting if this whole group is super fit, super metabolically healthy, everything looks good, and they're doing the opposite of what they're told to do.
Well, and again, this is where we get to hit a lot of these all at the same time. Bringing it back to the epidemiology, how much does that matter? How much does your being metabolically healthy matter, regardless of whether you're eating meat or eating plants? And my guess is that you're probably like me in that already is the single biggest thing, right?
Oh, you can eat all the plants you want. At least eat some animal foods and be fit and healthy and have, I think that's it.
And to be sure, I think, this isn't to say that I don't think diet isn't, 80-90% of our health. But the status of your health at the time that you're having that diet is very relevant, right?
Yeah, and how did you get this great metabolic health? It's with the diet, it's 90% of getting to this great metabolic health.
But what if you now have bad metabolic health? And then from a population of people with bad metabolic health, we start to extrapolate markers they have to the healthy population. That's something I feel very uncomfortable with, because there's a lot of confidence in things like lipid levels, for example, being causal, coming from these populations that have some form of dysfunctional lipid metabolism, including like acquired diseases like metabolic syndrome. Well, that's a big deal to me. I think that's confounding for the same reasons. And it's why I feel like I feel like we've kind of gotten a scientific opportunity of sorts, in that this rise of low-carb diets have provided this variable of interest, LDL, but absent those things associated with metabolic health, like, say, HDL being low and triglycerides being high.
We should also say it may not just be low-carb diet, or it could be, I guess, lower than normal. I'm not necessarily on a super low-carb diet anymore, but I think, actually, I'm going to get my blood results in a couple hours, actually.
Oh.
I mentioned to Joel that I was about to get them, and I have my appointment on Zoom right now. But a lot of people just who are eating a lot of red meat and and eggs and stuff like that, they don't necessarily have to be super low carb to have this phenotype. I think we should just back up a little more. I think we went too in the weeds too quickly. Think about people who aren't science, like cholesterol nerds like us too. What do they need to know? Like, they just know that their doctor said, hey, you have high cholesterol. And maybe if you're a normal person eating a normal diet, that could be bad. Absolutely. If you have high LDL and you're just eating the standard American diet and you're 100 pounds overweight, that's probably not a good thing, right?
It's possible.
It's
different.
So yeah, zoom out. Just tell us the cholesterol story a little, just more simply, and how it relates to diet and
let's do this. Let's talk about what is called in epidemiology and many things chain causality. So think of one thing knocking over the next, like dominoes, right? So something increases your LDL, and in turn, this increase in your LDL causes formation of plaque in your arteries. That's the present lipid hypothesis. That whatever the thing is, that first thing doesn't matter that much as the second thing, your LDL. So however high or low your LDL is, that will have the single largest impact on the development of plaque in your arteries. Now, the reason I was a little bit shy about saying, whether your LDL goes up or not, depending on what diet you're on, that's a bad thing, is I'm going to posit something else. Not because I'm sure it's true, but because I think it's worth considering, which is there's also the possibility that there's what's known as a common cause. Instead of a chain, there's a third or fourth or fifth thing that's causing both A and B, right? So could something increase your LDL cholesterol levels in the blood, but also cause cardiovascular disease? I think so. And this is with even acknowledging that LDL, being carried by those lipoproteins I described before, are a participant in that process of developing plaque. So let me give you an example to make it easy. Are car tires causal towards car accidents?
No.
They definitely are. How are you going to get into car accidents without car tires? Right? So it would be accurate to say they are part of the causal chain of car accidents. If we had an intervention where we banned all the car tires in this city, would we reduce car accidents?
Yeah.
Absolutely. We would level car accidents.
Oh.
It would be an orphan disease, as it were, right? An orphan cause of death.
A lot of walking, actually. A lot of people would do. Yeah.
A lot of walking. Now, there would be some side effects. Side effect number one, if you break your leg right now, you can't be hauled off to the hospital very easily in an ambulance, right? And never mind just breaking your leg, what if you were having a heart attack? Would heart attacks deaths by heart attacks increase? Probably, right? But I'm using this analogy mainly to illustrate this key point, which is just that at the end of the day, I'm interested in whether or not this clustering of things that resulted in higher LDL cholesterol is not confounded by other things it's involved with. So when I see high LDL, just like if I see any marker that's higher in a population that's metabolically unhealthy, that's going to be important to me because, again, what are we doing? We're shipping fuel in the bloodstream. Cholesterol being a part of that process of the shipping, if that process is broken, then maybe that association of the higher LDL could be a part of this larger clustered problem, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So that association with maybe you should worry about having higher LDL, again, fully acknowledging that could be the case, I still want to disentangle how much of that is a result of, how much of it is a consequence, as opposed to a cause. And that's why we need to do something like this study.
Yeah, and to go back on lean mass hyperresponders, LMHR, if we use that abbreviation. I think there's a Facebook group with like 9,000 people or more.
Yeah, now over 10.
10,000, yeah. I was right on the cutoff a few years back when I was lower carb, but HDL theoretically sort of higher is better. Triglycerides, you want them lower. So yes, so these people who are fit, they're lean. I saw these people in the group, they posted their photos, super strong, super lean. They've been doing this for a while, got their health all, on point. They probably had, say 100 things. I always use this magic number of 100. 99 things got better, and then one thing got worse, right. LDL. That's kind of this phenotype. And LDL, so this will happen. So also the triglyceride to HDL ratio, do you talk about that a lot?
I don't like ratio.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to, I myself, with my own family, I'll just say, I like to see HDL at 50 or higher. I like to see triglycerides of 100 and lower.
So
But generally speaking, the higher your HDL, along with the lower your triglycerides, the more that associates with metabolic health.
Exactly, which is so that ratio. And mine, back when I was first my journey, it was already down to 1-to-1. I think I'm below 1-to-1 now. But you want I got my triglycerides below 70, 60, and then my HDL was 70, something like that, which seems pretty good.
Yeah, and again, I'm emphasizing associates because you can still have genetic abnormalities. There's still things we don't fully know. But it's true, generally speaking, the more metabolically healthy, presumably you are, the more these are markers. And a lot of times that's the criticism is, hey, wait a sec, changing your HDL to a higher number, such as with a drug like CETP inhibitors, doesn't just reduce your cardiovascular disease naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with that. But then again, that was happening through a chemical compound. So it was a result of this, means of the inhibition of the cholesterol ester transfer protein. To get into the weeds, but it's another way. It's sort of like saying cars with 4 cylinders tend to be more fuel efficient than cars with 6 cylinders. I have this new way of making them 4 cylinders. I'm going to just smash off the other 2 cylinders, right? It's not the same. It's exactly. Actually changing it.
Well, that's what, people know about all drugs, you never trust that drug intervention. It's like, if you can get this result from a lifestyle intervention, that probably means it's a lot better.
I'm inclined to always start there. I'll just put it that way, right? So yes, the critics of paying attention to HDL and triglycerides would say that they're markers instead of makers. And the irony is that I completely agree with that. I think that that's going to be the case, but that doesn't make them any less important. They're extremely important, and they're an excellent gauge, I think, of what associates with better health. Yeah,
so I'll repeat again. This happened to me. 99 things got better. I felt amazing. I don't get sick anymore. My problems went away. Joint pain went away. Allergies went away. Acid reflux went away. I lost weight. I lost fat. I gained muscle. I could go on and on, but my LDL went up a bit.
Right.
So the whole idea is either that LDL is just going to kill me and I'm screwing myself over with all my great health changes, or our model of this is wrong. And that's kind of where you are. And the whole time you've been really balanced on this. I've noticed you're always saying, this is not scientific fact. This, we're on our journey. We're figuring this out. This is what I believe now. It may not be true.
Right.
So I love that. But now you actually are doing the studies. You got funded. Tell us more.
Yeah. So in 2019, I formed a public charity called the Citizen Science Foundation. And it was a little scary because I had no idea how successful or not successful it would be. But I knew I needed to get it in place first. I knew, as I mentioned in the talk, that it needed to be 0% admin fee. In other words, I myself, I know how I am when I do charitable giving, which is, I'm already thinking, as I'm writing the check.
Yeah, skeptical.
How much of this is going to get, bulked up from the admin side? And so, no, I made it, I'm blessed coming from technology that I kind of have this capability. I don't need when I formed this thing for it to pay my bills. So I really meant for it to be the means by which we would both raise the money, and they'd become the institute of record to go ahead and fund the studies. And it's really set up in a way that it could be audited in a few hours by a CPA easily. Because it's basically a tunnel. Like almost as fast as I'm raising the money, I'm sending it back out to this study. And that's what I did, is after I formed it, I announced the study. The study was I was going to get a bunch of people like we've been describing, metabolically healthy, like you, 99 benefits, but LDL ain't one, right?
Yeah.
/ ApoB, by the way. If you're a lean mass hyperresponder, you have high LDL, I can save you a lot of time and just let you know that your ApoB is going to be high too. And as I mentioned earlier, I see it as a huge scientific opportunity because we just didn't have this before. We had that clustering. We usually had high LDL that associates with low HDL and high triglycerides in people who are metabolically unhealthy. There's a talk that I just gave on fat cell size. You probably heard of hypertrophy. You usually want it when it has to do with muscle. You don't want it when it has to do with fat, because your cells can become very large and inflamed and start dying. And as your fat cells get larger, their interaction with that shipping system I was describing becomes poor. They're not as accepting of the fats coming off of those containers. So bringing it back to the study, here I think we have the opposite. I think lean mass hyperresponders have the opposite of what I just described. I think they have very small adipocytes, and they are really turning over those fatty acids very fast. It's a very hyperactive process, and that's now also what's published with the lipid energy model. Well, so I didn't know how many people would contribute, and to my great appreciation, thank you, low carb community, we've raised over $250,000 to fund this study. And Low Carb Denver, I announced that we're in talks to fund a companion study. That's what we're working on right now.
Well, that's great. Yeah, check out the video. You can get the full breakdown. The companion study is amazing because the study was doing so well. If you can share why you wanted to do the companion study.
Yeah. So it's worth kind of, like I did with the talk, I'll sort of take you inside the room because it's you have to understand, from 2019 when I announced the funding of this study, it's been a long journey, longest years of my life, getting all the way up until February 17th of this year. The reason I mentioned February 17th is it is burned into my brain. I'm finally going to the Lundquist Institute. Our principal investigator, Dr. Budoff, fantastic guy. Very decorated scientist, by the way. He has over 1,200 papers to his name, by the way. And easily one of the most foremost scientists around CT angiography. What was it? The 9th? So 8 days before that, we had gotten our 100th person scanned. And our study is 100 total participants. Well, as I mentioned, they're each getting 2 scans. But this first set, once the first set was completed of scans, we actually had really potentially powerful data in hand. Because how much plaque they already had would be very relevant to us all, since the average time, as it turns out, that they had been at these levels, at these super high levels of LDL, was 4.4 years. So I already had an inkling that it'd be close to half a decade. So our baseline data, if you're already looking at people who have sky high LDL at half a decade, the signal should already be there at baseline, even before we've gotten the second scans. They should already be presenting with very high levels of plaque. And I always had in my mind that there was always that scenario that Matt would call me at some point in time and say, yeah, we have to cancel the study because too many people are showing up, we're scanning them, they have too much plaque.
I know the studies do that, right? Where if everyone on the intervention arm, then it's doing poorly, it's not scientifically ethical to keep going. Yeah, there's like a scientific ethics thing where if they're not doing well, you have to stop the study.
Right, appropriately, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're doing something in the course of a study and it becomes obvious in a substantial way that the population you're working with, for which everybody's uncertain as to whether they're at a higher risk, and then it becomes quite obvious they are in fact at a higher risk, then an ethical consideration needs to be made. Now, to be fair, I'll be upfront that sometimes I feel like those margins vary between different scientists as to what is worth, for example, stopping a study based on powering of events and that kind of thing. But in our case, the signal would have been pretty obvious.
Yeah. So these are all people that are doing insane, crazy diets, eating tons of fat, eating lots of meat. 4.5 years, you're doing this. Is it a CAC?
It's called a CT angiogram.
That measures plaque.
It measures both soft and calcified plaque in the coronary arteries.
Okay, so it's even better than a CAC.
By a long shot.
Long shot. That's why they have to fly in to do it, and that you use the same machine and the whole thing.
Yeah, we fly all of our participants to Lundquist.
Mm-hmm.
That actually is unusual in that what they usually do is they recruit people in various, it's called multi-centers. So there's multiple places that have, say, the CT angiogram machine. They recruit people locally. However, our situation was different because even though there's a lot of lean mass hyperresponders, there's not like a ton of them in every city.
Yeah.
Or for that matter, there might be and we just don't know who they are. We can't recruit them easily. So I wanted to with that in mind, I wanted to both use one scanner, so it was the same team, same scanner. But on top of that, I went the extra mile. It cost a lot more, but I wanted people to fly in from the afternoon or evening before and then have a fully rested night there so that they would get their scan in the morning. And so I could count on it being metabolically, I know I'm tossing the word metabolic out a lot, but I know from my own experimentation that having a fully fasted test is already very meaningful to your blood work. I think it may also be meaningful to other metrics. And I don't know for sure, but I'd rather just be on the safe side. And so everybody stays at a hotel that we have, that's our study hotel. They rest overnight, and then they get scanned in the morning.
This is great. I love this. So these people might be metabolic, or they could have tons of problems and not know it. They've been doing this for 4.5 years. They're insane maniacs, eating meat and fat. And that's what you were collecting on February 19th, or what you saw. When did you get this back, or what was the,
Well, they got it. They had everything in hand on the 9th. That's when the last person was scanned. They did their analysis, and then I got presented with because it's preliminary data, as the funder, appropriately, I don't ever see the individualized data, right? But the aggregates, they can say, well, here are the aggregates, and then they're assessing for themselves if they feel like it's worth publishing. So if it was middling, then it might not even be that novel a data. But it was very novel data. It was jaw-dropping, I'll just say that. So I think I can speak to a number of these numbers off the top of my head. First of all, the average age, now that we have all 100 participants in hand, the average age was 55.3. Now, I like that, along with the fact that it was 60 males, 40 females, frankly, because I know it's just going to be more likely that we'll have plaque at baseline. That may sound a little unintuitive, but it's harder to track plaque if it's not there in the first place, right?
So men have more plaque. Men have more heart disease. I know that.
Men are more likely to develop heart disease, and they're more likely to develop it earlier. And they're almost certainly more likely to develop it into middle age.
Yeah, so 55 is a good thing, 55.3, because if we looked at a bunch of 30-year-olds, maybe we wouldn't find any plaque anyway.
Correct. Like I kind of say this jokingly, but it's not fully a joke. My worst nightmare is it would be like, say, all 20-something women that would show up, which would have been super unlikely we would have any plaque at baseline. So at 55, pretty solid chance that not only would there be plaque at baseline, but that there'd be plaque advancement. Like that's for a high-risk population. You have to remember, they already have one technically risk factor in that they're all hypercholesterolemic. They all have high levels of cholesterol.
Yeah,
right?
their total cholesterol is like above 260.
That's what. Yeah, it's about 260.
Yeah.
The average is 260 at that point in the prelim data.
Which to normal doctors is insane.
Of course. Well, the present guidelines say at 190. I mean, I realize you and I were probably used to seeing this in the low carb community a lot, but every single day at the low carb, at the Lean Mass Hyperresponder Facebook group, somebody will show up and they'll say, "My doctor's telling me this is the highest cholesterol they've ever seen," right? And I said this in the talk. I looked at NHANES, and to give you a sense of it, I had 50,000 people that were in the NHANES data set that I had, and only 1 in 1,000 would have an LDL of 260 or higher.
Yeah.
So that shows just how incredibly rare it is. So I get it. I totally understand why doctors would be very concerned for these folks. But yes, as I'm like looking at the data, the first slide Budoff shows their calcification. And the calcification surprised me immediately because I knew it looked like a zero risk factor group. Let me kind of break that down for you a little bit. If we grabbed 100 random people with zero risk factors who were same demographics, they were average age 55, 60 of the 100 were male, and they were otherwise metabolically healthy. So our other eligibility criteria is they didn't have a prior diagnosis of heart disease or diabetes or anything along those lines. There's already large studies around this, like the CAC Consortium. It would show that that group, a little more than half would probably have a zero CAC. Some would have a CAC of between 1 to 10. Some would have between 11 and 100. Some would have between 100 and 300, and some would have 300 and higher, like a handful. Probably like 4 or 5 would have 300 and higher. Point being is that a lot of us have asymptomatic heart disease, even at zero risk factors, and don't know it.
General public, even not already with heart disease or diabetes, already probably like more than half, about half would have some sort of risk.
That's why I kind of gave that exact description.
Yeah.
In that exact description, I happen to already know this because I had just literally before Budoff showed me that first slide, I already knew what that stratification was from looking at studies like this. So I was like, oh, this looks like a zero risk factor stratification. It looks comparable to that, right?
Okay.
So already in my mind, I was like, oh, okay, so that's probably
That's
what the
good.
soft plaque will look like too. And I'm like, this is going to look like a low risk factor, like a zero risk factor grouping. But then when you move to the next slide, I could see what's called total plaque score. And I should unpack that a little bit. So total plaque score, what they do is when they're looking through these CT angiograms, it's like a 3D scan. They can kind of move in and out in 3D space. They're looking at 15, 16, or 17 different points of interest. They determine it in advance. In our case, it's 15. So it's 15 points where plaque is more likely to develop than other places, like a bifurcation or a curvature, something along those lines. Common places where they're likely to show up. And they give it a score of 0 to 3 for each of these points. 0 means there's no observable plaque, 1 means it's mild, 2 means it's medium, 3 means it's severe. So at 15 of these places with a possible score of 0 to 3, we know that you can have a score from 0 to 45. And so in seeing the calcification slide before this one, I felt like I already knew that it was probably going to be maybe about half that would have a 0 total plaque score. At least I was hoping so. And then probably more than half, it'd be that same stratification I was telling you about. Some would be a little bit higher, some would be a little bit higher. And there'd probably be a handful that were, more like in the 20s or even 30s of total plaque score. And so he then moves to the next slide, and to my great surprise, there's nobody in double digits of plaque scores. Wow. All of them have single digit plaque scores, with most of them having 0.
That's amazing.
And that was, I'll never forget that moment, because the documentary team was there and they're filming me, and I probably looked like a zombie because I was just staring at it, and I was waving my hand at one point. I was like, are there more bars to the right of this 9?
Yeah.
Right? Because Buddha was like, no. And I remember the cameraman said something like, can we get this take again or something? And I was just in a daze. Like I just couldn't believe it. Yeah, at that point, it was quite obvious. The whole team knew we needed to publish.
That is amazing. Well, explain it for the audience that's maybe not exactly sure what this all means.
Yeah, so taking a step back, if you didn't know about this study, if you didn't even know about low carb, and I told you, hey, we're studying this group of people, they have an unusual circumstance about them, but they have LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, in the 99.9th percentile of the population.
Literally 99.9, yeah. They're the top 0.1%. Yeah.
Right. We suspect that they may actually have a lower than expected incidence of heart disease. Right. Now, for one, just general public-wise, you'd probably go, that doesn't sound right at all. That doesn't make any sense. I would immediately associate it with smoking. So you're telling me somebody who smokes 4 packs a day
is not going
to have any risk, right? And then on top of that, I come back to you later and I'm like, actually at baseline, they look like a group that has no high cholesterol and otherwise looks healthy. Like they have no other risk factors at all, right?
It's like one of the healthiest groups around. Like it's hard to find a group that healthy if you just went out.
Right.
You wouldn't. Actually, you just said you wouldn't really find that group.
Yeah. Now, again, I'll state one more time because I can't emphasize this enough. Our eligibility criteria was taking out all the other cardiovascular risk factors. So a likely critiquing of our study, which I could appreciate, is, hey, wait a sec, you were looking at people who are metabolically healthy with very high LDL. But to which I would say, that's exactly right. That was the whole point this whole time. If the expectation is, which it is, under conventional medical science, that high LDL is always higher risk at a population level, then this population should reflect that. They should reflect a clear and pronounced presentation of plaque, as well as a clear progression of plaque, as would be expected by the work of Brown and Goldstein when they were looking at children with homozygous FH who did have early heart disease, but also had high LDL.
Familial hypercholesterolemia.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I would also posit in that case that there's a genetic aspect of dysfunctional lipid metabolism. They also have a problem with the process of those lipids. So, yes, at that point in time, I was like, we need to get this published soon. However, you know that happened in February. I thought we might be published March, April. We're still not published yet. The process behind the scenes is still a lengthy one.
Sounds like Food Lies. The behind the scenes process is 6 years. Well, that's great. So you're still on your way to publishing that, and then that's why you guys decided to do the companion study, because it was so surprising. It was like, this is amazing.
Yeah, originally we were thinking we wouldn't really have a solid sense of how novel this data was until we got to the very end of the study, which would be February of next year. That's when the last participant will have had their second scan. And so it would succeed. It would be a successive study. But as I said at Low Carb Denver, and as I definitely feel now, there's no point in waiting. We should start getting the ball rolling. And so I call it a companion study because it'll happen in parallel, presumably. I say presumably because we do need to get this first piece published. That's part of what will help me raise the money I need to get the companion study off the ground.
Okay. So yeah, when you announce that, I can share it, and hopefully people who are interested in this will want to support it because yeah, it's just funded by the crowd. It's
Yeah.
awesome so far. And what's the companion study like? I know you want to do a control group.
Yeah, so there are a few things I know for sure. One is that we'll have a control group. Another is that it'll be a more relaxed criteria. We'll have the backing of the existing study to help justify that. So I can't say for sure what it'll be, but probably the HDL requirements will be lower and the triglyceride requirements will be higher, and probably a little bit more relaxed criteria on the risk factors. It may be multi-center, but I don't know yet for sure on that.
So they don't have to fly to the same place. And then what is a control group? Explain how that's going to work.
Well, that's part of where the debate internally with us is going. There's a few different ideas that are being tossed around. I'll kind of mention them, but without committing any of them. One is just recruiting a number of people that we know would fit a comparable profile to the lean mass hyperresponders. You know, again, comparable risk factors.
So no diabetes, no heart disease.
Yeah, unless we allow for that on the lean mass
Both sides,
hyperresponder side.
yeah.
Right. We're going to try to get them as close to a match as possible. But on the plus side, they can be recruited more from California, where Lundquist is at, if we end up doing Lundquist all over again. Because I do still like the controlled process I was describing, where we make sure that they've stayed overnight and that they're fully fasted. And if we do multi-center, it may not be the same way. It's a lot more on the logistics side, and it costs a lot more, but I'm a control freak.
Oh, well, no,
so.
This is great. And this is what we need, is to really narrow it down to just as few variables as possible.
Yeah, that's how I want it.
Yeah. I wonder, as I asked Dr. Joel Kahn what would change his mind. You know, it's a good debate. Before the debate, what would have to change? What would change your mind about your position? And I said that all the cave paintings and all the meat eating throughout history was faked. It was all false. And that Brianna Pobner, she's in the film. She's the one that looked at the fossils of the mammoth bones that were cut. The cut marks. It's like, if she's fake, it's all a lie. That's the only way I'll change my position. No, he said if there were some of these studies that showed that, you could have high LDL and be healthy, or that stuff like that, he would change his mind. So,
I think Joel will actually be more likely than not to be somebody who gets swayed by the evidence, if that's where it shows, if it's where it takes us. The thing that I'll be mindful of, that you recognized from earlier, is this may be a pivotal study. It won't be a definitive study. So, as I said at Low Carb Never, and as I'll say again, it's fair to say, hey, one study can be groundbreaking, but you need replication. So I'm already looking ahead to, I want to see, if we can further expand out, if we're seeing more replication, then that can really start changing the paradigms.
Or even other people. Are any other people studying this?
That's honestly probably my biggest complaint, is I'm still trying to get the whole field of lipidology, I mean, just anybody, to really get interested and motivated to work with us, or not work with us. Like, I'll help them recruit. I'll say this, Brian, my one concern is that I sort of feel like there's such a wind blowing against low carb and especially keto, such that I would prefer that they focus on this distinction that I'm drawing. Because if it's true, whether there's functional or dysfunctional lipid metabolism as being relevant to this association with cardiovascular disease, we have to quit tricking ourselves. We should take data like this and be like, oh, this is a reason not just to look at people going on low carb and seeing high LDL, but to specifically and intentionally separate out these other things associating cardiovascular disease that can confound that data.
Yeah, this is big stuff. Why do you think no one wants to study it? Is there an obvious reason that this is gonna go against the entire pharmaceutical model? And
my more, I guess you could say, generous take Which, to be fair, listen, there's a bunch of people I talk to, lipidologists, cardiologists. I mean, they're not on the payroll of pharma. They genuinely believe this. And
Well, why do they believe this?
Because it's a compelling it's a compelling story. Look, Brown and Goldstein's The Children with FH, I totally get it. I totally understand why that would be. And there's another factor which I just presented on that it took me a long time to figure out for myself, which is that we're wired to like the simple problem that has a simple solution. Like, we're wired for it to where we desire it. It's not just, hey, I have this story to tell you and it's simple and therefore it's easier for you to remember and retain. It's that you want it to be that simple. You like, and I like, when something is easily understandable and it's like,
it fits.
Exactly.
Like,
here's the one marker and that's how I can, I just need to modulate this one marker. That's really the name of the game, and then I can get on with the rest of my life.
And also we're wired to want to go along with the crowd too, and all the research has been done in the same way. The textbooks have been written in this, under this model. Also, well, the unhealthy population, I always say that too. It's like, I think that has something to do with it. If you're studying a whole group of people that are metabolically unhealthy, that's what all of our standard models are based on.
Right, and I think that's a huge problem. I really wish, like, if I were just king of the world and I could just direct resources, I would make it a rule that 25% of funding goes to studying healthy populations. Full stop. And just derive data from healthy populations and then compare and contrast all of that data.
You think we could find these healthy populations? I'm like looking around, like, my degree of health is maybe just too great for most people, because I'm like, I have a lot of criteria.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it's definitely out there.
Yeah.
It's true, it's narrowing. But I think if we had more data on healthy populations, it would be a powerful means by which to lead all of us towards a healthier way of life. That's the issue. The issue is, as long as we keep moving our standards with where we all seem to understand is the unhealthy direction. I often consider things like, say, added sugar as like smoking was in the 50s and 60s. People knew it wasn't good, right? So even people on carb-centric diets are like, no, added sugar and sugary drinks, they're not, you know.
Well, no one thinks they're healthy. It's like, I'm going to have a soda. It's going to be great.
Right, exactly. But that's the same thing with smoking, is a lot of people will be like, yeah, I should probably cut back on smoking, but my doctor smokes more than I do. So you'd have a lot of people saying the exact same thing now with a lot of foods that they know that they shouldn't be eating, right? To the extent to where I can't help but go, you know, if we all weren't doing it, I'll bet it would feel differently, because that's how it feels for smokers now. It feels awkward to be the smoker. And in a way, that's helped a lot of smokers. A lot of smokers I know who said, you know, when it became a lot less hip, it became easier for me to quit.
Yeah. I mean, we're trapped in this system, this modern world of processed foods, and it's everywhere. Yeah, you just think it's crazy that people just eat whole foods only, you know? It's like you're the oddball. So I guess to jump ahead to the solution, you know, is that if you were the Lord for the day, like you could, if we shifted society where it was normal to avoid all these highly processed foods.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, of course that would be healthier. It's just
But even to get there, it's like you need that critical mass of people. You know what I mean? You need to change the tide like we did with smoking.
Yeah.
Because part of it's psychological. Like, we do go along with a group and you do what's normal. You know what I mean? You can't just like overnight be like, because like I said, like you said, people know soda's bad, yet they still drink it. People know things are bad. So there's the behavior side.
Yeah.
Right?
But there's a lot of things around it. And one of the things that's around it is that there's not a culture on the science side of pushing against it in the way that it should. So getting back to smoking, what did we have going back to the 50s? If you look back at the history of Bradford Hill, I mean, we know about him as the father of epidemiology, and his, you know, the Bradford Hill criteria and so forth. But he was implanted in a time in which there was a lot of debate among the scientists as to really how bad or not bad smoking is, right? And that debate being present is part of what gave people the sense of permissiveness, that it can't be that bad. There still seems to be a lot of argument as to how bad it actually is. And this again is why I get frustrated with a lot of the science that seems to want to focus on things that I don't think are as meaningful as other things. But the problem is I feel like that's a much harder hill to climb.
Yeah. Well, this whole thing, it's like the ship doesn't want to turn around. The ship is making a lot of money going in this direction.
Right.
What's the incentive for them to be like, oh, let's study these healthy people out in Austin that are, doing all these great things, eating a lot of meat and hanging out in the sun?
Yeah.
Who's going to fund that other than you and your great people that fund you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's not a product or device or supplement I don't have anything that's attached to this research. In fact, if anything, it can potentially lose a lot of people money. But I want to appeal to people's better angels to say, look, we should all be at least able to agree that people shouldn't be put on medication that they don't need to be put on. If they should at least be able to make an informed choice, and if they come to an understanding that they are actually at low risk, because that's what the data show, they deserve to have that answer.
Well, your path is the same as smoking, kind of. So we finally were like, okay, smoking is bad. This does cause cancer. And then the population got the picture. Actually, they did a lot of campaigns for it, right? They're like, no, this is harmful. And then it did change. But the science needs to happen first.
Yeah, but I also think that I think there was a bit more of a tipping point within the scientific community when it came to smoking.
I don't know if there's going to be a tipping point in this cholesterol world. There's going to be a few studies and the people are going to ignore them. What do you think?
It's hard when you've got the potential of people walking around with LDL in the levels I just described. Remember, the average, not one or two, the average of our group is in the 99.9 percentile, right? The mean average.
Yeah.
It would be different if we were studying folks with, like, say, an LDL of 145, right? Which is in, I don't know, the 55th percentile, right? No, we're looking at folks who absolutely should be presenting with advanced atherosclerosis given the present lipid hypothesis.
So yeah, this isn't just for people who are like hardcore keto diet, checking their ketones. I mean, these are people who are eating a lot of meat, eating, higher fat diets, right?
Potentially. That's, I'm more than comfortable at saying, hey, this first study, take it for its exact context. So for example, if somebody has high LDL but for different reasons, they do have a genetic abnormality such as monogenetic FH. Their situation may be different. It's hard to say without further research in their context, wrapping in their context. That said, I would state that we're in uncharted territory, and that's not the worst thing. As we accumulate more data, it gives us more opportunity to accumulate further data.
All right. Well, I love your approach. You're a good scientist. You're not just going off and saying you're right, and you're always questioning your own beliefs, and that's what science is, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. The last 3.5 years, I was just talking about this on the podcast yesterday, that you couldn't question the science. It was the science. And we're like, hey, that doesn't make any sense. There is no the science. Science is questioning.
It's a process. Science is not a destination. It's a process. It's a description of a process.
And you're doing the process that no one else wants to do. I love it. Where can people find you? cholesterolcode.com?
Yeah, that was the original blog that started off. It's now kind of an information hub. Naturally, they can check out citizensciencefoundation.org. Thanks to everybody for their contributions. And of course, there's ownyourlabs.com, which is our blood testing service, but it's another way by which people can participate in citizen science because we incentivize people at checkout to take a discount of 10% if they want to contribute their anonymized data to what will eventually be our open data archive.
That's cool. Well, tell them what's Own Your Labs.
Own Your Labs it's kind of think of it as sort of like Amazon, but for blood work. You go there and let's say you want to get insulin and A1C and comprehensive metabolic panel. You just choose them, or some of them are in bundles. And what we do is we then send you a lab requisition, which you can then take to your local LabCorp, get your blood drawn, and then you get your data directly.
That's great. And then when you get your data, you can save a little money, and then we can use it.
Yeah, true. And actually, all of my partner share right now goes to Citizen Science Foundation. So I could correctly say a portion of proceeds goes there. But on top of that, there's that open data archive we'll eventually have, which is nice because then you're helping out the scientific community because there's not a lot of open data on low carb populations. It's kind of a problem, in my opinion.
Well, I like this because, yes, these are the healthy populations that we need to study.
Right.
And we need that data. I'll see if I can throw my data in there if it's not too late, or use it next time. That's awesome, man. Dave Feldman, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Good stuff.